We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Gemara in Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 5a. On the previous summer, Reb Oshia had 13 avos nezikin, and Reb Chia had 24 avos nezikin. And the Gemara asked, why didn't Reb Oshia list the avos nezikin of Reb Chia? And the Gemara answered that Reb Oshia wasn't listing things that were knas, things that were fines. And so the Gemara now continues to ask on that answer, and the Gemara says, well, Edom Zomamin, what about Edom Zomamin, which is on the list of Reb Chia and not on the list of Reb Oshia? To Mamonahu, that really is Mamon, and listening, so he should learn that one, he should teach that as one of the avos nezikin. And Rashi explains, Edom Zomamin de Mamonahu, Dechol HaMeshalim Yoser al Mashahizik, because anytime you're paying more than the damage, could go in Kefil v'Tashlumi Arba v'Chamisha, for example, you're paying double, or you're paying 4 or 5 times the amount, Kari Knas, that's referred to as a Knas. Kedalakamon b'Hachpirkin, like we'll say later on. Uchagon Kol Davar Kotzav ha'Amr b'Torah, also, anytime you have to pay a fixed amount from the Torah, Kagon Chamishim Shel Ones. For example, you're paying the 50, let's say someone who commits rape has to pay 50. Or he seduces, he pays 50. Umeya shel motzi shemra pays 100. Kulu have a kanas. So all of those are kanas. Avol midia achrina mamona. But anything else that doesn't fall into that category, that's called mammon, and therefore Edom Zomamin is called mammon. So again, why doesn't Reb Oshia list Edom Zomamin as one of the avos nezikin? And the Gemara answers to that. Savar lok Rabbi Akiva. Reb Oshia holds like Rabbi Akiva. Damar ein mishalman al piatzman. Rabbi Akiva holds that Edom Zomamin do not pay when they admit. And Rashi explains, Savar lak Rabbi Akiva, the Amr Meseches Makos, Rabbi Akiva says in Meseches Makos, Beparakam in the first parak, Edom Zomamin ein mishalmim al pi atzman. Edom Zomamin do not pay through their own words. Kagonim huzmu bebezin. For example, the case would be as follows. Let's say they are falsified in Bezdin. Kagonim huzmu bebezin zeh. They're falsified in this particular Bezdin. Velo hispik baldin lahamidon bedin. But then the litigant isn't actually able to bring them to court, to bring them to justice, ulatovan, and to claim the money from them, and they quickly go to another place, and they admit over there in a different bezdin, and they say that we were falsified in this other bezdin, Peturin, in that case they actually are pater, Alma Knasahu, you see from that halacha of Rabbi Akiva that it's actually considered to be a knas, umoda b'knas pater, because what Rabbi Akiva is doing is he's employing the rule of moda b'knas pater. The rule is if you admit by a fine, then you are pater. That's why they are pater. That's why it's ein mishalman al piatzman. The point over here is that you see according to Rabbi Akiva it is a knas, and if Rabbi Oshia holds like Rabbi Akiva, that's why he doesn't list Edom Zomamin in his list of avos nezikin. But the Gemara says, Isavar like Rabbi Akiva, but if that's true that Rabbi Oshia holds like Rabbi Akiva, Lisni Tre Gavne Shor, then you could actually learn 2 different kinds of shor. Lisni Shor Da'azik Shor, you can learn the shor that damages another shor, that damages property. V'lisni Shor Da'azik Adam, and you can also learn a shor that damages a person, because Rabbi Akiva has a unique shita. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva says, Af tam shechaval biyadam, if you have even a tam, even an animal that is not a muad, that damages a person, mishalim b'moser nezek shalim, pays the full amount, the amount of nezek shalim, not the chatzi nezek. And Rashi explains, Rabbi Akiva, if Rabbi Oshia holds like Rabbi Akiva, listening Trey Gavne Shor, so he should teach 2 kinds of shor in his avos nezikin. The holy Rabbi Akiva, yesh chiluk ben tashlumin shel shor da'azik shor, to lo mashalim al chatzi nezek, le tashlumin shor da'azik adam. Because according to Rabbi Akiva, there's a distinction between the payment that is made by a shor that damages a shor. Let's say a shor tam damages another shor, the payment is only chatzi nezek, it's only half. Whereas by a shor that damages a person, the tanan lekamon beperak haminiach hasakad Rabbi Akiva Omer, we learned later on in the Mishnah in Perek HaMiniach HaSakad that Rabbi Akiva says, B'moser means as follows, Im chaval adam b'shor tam, let's say a person damages a short tam, v'tam ba'adam, and then that same tam damages that person, v'shamu bezin chavola shechaval shor ba'adam yoser, mechavola shechaval adam b'shor, and the bezin evaluates that the damage the shor did is actually more than the damage the person did. Mishalim bal hashor oso odif, that's the point of moser. The owner of the shor has to pay that extra, that moser, and has to pay nezek shalim, has to pay the full amount. And so you see again there's a distinction between shor da'azik shor and shor da'azik adam according to Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Oshia should take that distinction into account as well. And the Gemara answers to that, Hatavre Rabbi Akiva Legzize. Rabbi Akiva broke that opinion. Rashi says, Legzize lekoach agrofo, to the strength of his opinion. Kid Amr b'Sanhedrin b'Parakama adya legziza v'kam. There in Sanhedrin as well, the word geziza refers to the fist. Again, it's the strength of the fist. He broke that opinion. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says, Yochel, I might think, aftam shechaval ba'adam yeshalim min ha'aliyah, that if a tam damages a person, he pays min ha'aliyah. It's not true. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, Yeyasa lo, the full pasuk is Oven yigach ovas yigach kamishput hazeh yeyasa lo. It's talking again about a shore that is damaging a person, and we understand from the pasuk of Yeyasa lo, migufa mashalim, that the payment is migufa, only from the body of the shore, only up to the value of the shore. V'yeino mashalim min haliyah, and the payment is not min haliyah. You don't pay extra when it comes to the tam that damages a person, and therefore you see that Rabbi Akiva actually took back that opinion. And Rashi explains, Yachol Yeshalim Tam Shechaval Ba'adam Minhu Aliyah. I might think that if a tam damages person pays Minhu Aliyah, meaning beyond the value of the shore itself, Talmud Lomar, Veshtakach, so we find according to Rabbi Akiva, it's not true. The Lo Meshalim Nezek Shalim, that when it comes to a short tam that damages a person, he does not pay the full amount. Ela Kemosha Hashor Shava, the most that can possibly be paid is the amount that the shore is worth. And the Gemara continues, Ha'ones v'hamefata v'hamotzi shemra. What about ones, mefata, and motzi shemra? Even though there's a fine involved in all of those cases, but you also have to pay damages. To Mamonu, there is mammon involved listening, so why doesn't Reb Oshia teach those in his list of avos nezikin? And to that the Gemara says, Monavshach, well, either way it's already included. In nezek tanale, in terms of the nezek that's paid, that's already been listed by Reb Oshia. Itzar tanale, if we're talking about the pain, that was also listed by Reb Oshia. Nezek and tsar were both listed. Iboshes tanale, and Boshes as well, that was also listed, the humiliation. Ipagam, and if you're referring to pagam, hainu nezek, pagam is essentially the same as nezek. Pagam is the blemish, so to speak, that has now occurred to the woman through this act of ones, mefata, etc., but that's the same as nezek. So ma'is lach lememar, so what are you going to say? Kanasa, you're going to say there's a fine left. But kanasa lo kamari, as we already said, Reb Oshia does not take kanas into account in his avos nezikin. And the Gemara continues, Hametame v'hamedame v'hamenasech. Well, what about somebody's metame, somebody else's truma? Somebody's medame mixes in chulin with somebody else's truma, or somebody's menasech, somebody pours somebody else's wine to avodah zarah. In all of those cases, you're inflicting damage on the person's property. Now, that damage is not visible, but it is damage nonetheless. The mamonhu, that is a damage of mammon. Listening, why doesn't Reb Oshia have those three cases? And the Gemara says, Manavshach, again, either way you look at it, I hezek she'eno nikor shmei hezek. If you're going to say that an invisible kind of damage is considered a damage, hatanale nezek, he already listed nezek, and I hezek she'eno nikor lo shmei hezek. Now, if that kind of a damage is not considered a damage, havale knasa, that would then be in the category of a knas, a fine, uviknasa lo kamairi. And again, Reb Oshia is not dealing with knas. And the Gemara continues, Lema kasav Rabbi Chia hezek she'eno nikor lo shmei hezek. Let us suggest that Rabbi Akiva holds hezek she'eno nikor is not considered hezek. Di shmei hezek, because if it's considered regular hezek, hatanale nezek. Again, Rabbi Chia also already has nezek in his list. And the Gemara answers to that, Tana hezeka de minkara. He teaches a kind of damage which is recognizable, which is visible. V'tana hezeka de lo minkara, and he also teaches a kind of damage that is not visible. And the Gemara continues, B'shalama l'tana didan. I understand according to the Tana of our Mishnah, Tana minyana l'mu'uta de Reb Oshia. So the Tana of our Mishnah uses the number, there are 4 avos nezikin, to exclude the number of Reb Oshia. Reb Oshia, Tana minyana, Reb Oshia also teaches a number. He had 13 avos nezikin. L'mu'uta de Reb Chia, that comes to exclude Reb Chia, who had 24. Ela minyana de Reb Chia l'mu'uta mai. But the number of Reb Chia, what does that come to exclude? And the Gemara says, l'mu'uta moser u'mefagel. It comes to exclude the case of moser. The case of moser is, let's say somebody informs the government about another Jew, and the government therefore confiscates that Jew's property. That's a kind of damage. It's coming to exclude that. That's not in the list. And mefagel would be, let's say a Kohen brings a carbon, but he doesn't have the proper intent. He essentially disqualifies the person's carbon. Now the person has to bring a new carbon. So that also is a kind of monetary damage that Rabbi Chia does not list. And the Gemara says, "V'listening, well, why not list those two?" And the Gemara says, "Bishlama mefagel." I understand why we're not listing mefagel, b'kachim lo kamairi, because we're not listing things that have to do with kachim, that have to do with karbanos. Ela moser my time alotani, but when it comes to moser, why is that not taught according to Rabbi Chia? And the Gemara says, Shani Moser is different to Dibura because it's something that happens through speech. Uva Dibura lo kamayre. Rabbi Chia is not dealing with things that happen through speech. The Gemara says, Va Motzi Shemra, but what about Motzi Shemra? The Dibura, that also is speech. That's where the husband is falsely claiming that his wife is not a virgin, the Katani, and yet he teaches that. And so the Gemara says, Dibura de Ispe Maisu. That's actually a speech, but it involves a Maisa. They had to have relations with one another for this to occur. And the Gemara says, Va Edem Zomim Dibura, the Lesbe Maisahu, but what about Edem Zomim? That's a kind of a speech. There's no action involved, the Katani, and yet he has that in his list. And the Gemara says, Hasam over there, Afagav de Lesbe Maisa, even though there is no actual action, Rachmana Kirya Maisa, but the Torah refers to it as an action. Because it's written, Vasisam lo, that we do to him, Kasher Zamam Lasos Lachiv, like he tried to do to his brother. So you see the language of La'asos, the language of Asiya, the language of doing. And the Gemara continues, B'shlama l'tana didan, I understand according to the Tana of our Mishnah, Tana avos mechlal di'ika toldos. The reason why we call it avos is to imply that there are toldos. Elul Rabbi Chia Rabbi Oshia, but according to Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshia, avos mechlal di'ika toldos. Let's say you're going to say the same idea, that they refer to them as avos to imply that there are toldos. Toldos say in my new, what kind of toldos are there in all of these cases? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Yavo says, Kulon ka'avos l'shalem imetav. The reason why Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yoshia are referring to them as avos is because they're all similar to avos, because you have to pay for the damage with the best of the person's property. And the Gemara says, my time, and what's the reason? How do we know that in all of these cases you have to pay me metav? And to that the Gemara says, Asya tachas nesina yishalem kesef. By all of these cases, we have at least one of these words, tachas or nesina or yishalem and kesef, and through verbal analogy we understand that in all of these cases you have to pay me metav. And Rashi explains, Tachas Nasina devekulu ksiv o Tachas, because in all of these cases, either it writes the word Tachas, if it says the word Tachas, V'garminan Tachas mishor hamuad, then we're going to learn how to Gzer Shavet Tachas from shor hamuad. T'chsib be shor Tachas ashor, it says over there, shor Tachas ashor, Mahasam mimetav, the Gomer mishein v'regel, just like over there it's from the best, we learn out from shein v'regel, T'chsib be metav sadeu, it says from the best, Afkan metav soto, over here it's from the best, Shimbola shalem karkel and izuk, b'shvil azeko, magveu mina idius. Again, the idea is that if you want to collect land and you want to give land to the nizik because of the damage, you have to do from the best, o nesina, or it'll say the word nesina by these cases. V'gamar nesina mishor shanogach esaeved. If it says nesina, we can learn out from the case of an ox that gores a slave. Dechsib be yitain la'adon. If it says the word yitain over there, o yishalem, or it says the word yishalem by these cases. V'gamar mishein v'regel. Then we can learn out from shein v'regel. Dechsib bohen meitav karmo yishalem. It says meitav karmo yishalem. O kesef, or it says the word kesef by these cases, v'gamri mibor, and in that case we can learn from bor, d'chsib be kesef yoshiv levolov, because it says kesef yoshiv leba'olav, v'arba avos gemiri kulu mishein v'regel. All the arba avos are learned from shein v'regel, and Rashi goes on to say in each and every one of these cases where it says tachas, where it says nesina, where it says yishalim, and where it says kesef. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Lo hare hashor kare hamavet, that shor is not like mavet, etc. And the Gemara clarifies, my kamra, what exactly is the point of this statement in the Mishnah? And we've discussed this earlier. Amar Rav Zvid Mishmei de Rava. Rav Zvid says in the name of Rava, Hachi kamra, this is what the Mishnah means to say. Lichtov rachman achada, let the Torah just write one of them. B'teisi idach minei, we can learn the other one out from that. Hadar Amar chada mechada lo asya. And then the Mishnah is saying, you can't do that. You can't learn one from the other. V'lo zev v'zeh sheyesh ben ruach chaim. And these two, they both have ruach chaim. It's talking about creatures with life. Again, my kamra, what exactly is the Mishnah saying? Amar Rav Misharshia Mishmei de Rava. Rav Misharshia, in the name of Rava, says, Hachi kamra, this is what it is saying. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Hey Amud Beis.